My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 33. There are some family texts that arrive like invitations and others that feel like summons. My mother's message was somewhere between a plea and a trap. Please come this time. Everyone wants to see you. 4 years had passed since I had sat at one of their tables. Not because I nursed a grudge the size of a country, though maybe in a pocketed corner of me I did, but because family gatherings had become an anatomy of comparison. Who had the house, whose child had soccer trophies, who'd climbed the corporate ladder with the right smile? I had always been the footnote they circulated when they told the story of how not to do things. The house was the same phoned-in Baroque as ever, Uncle Ron's estate, with the ornately ridiculous iron eagle planted like an accusation above the garage and a circular driveway that seemed to swallow humility with the same appetite it swallowed cars. My Tesla slid into the approach as if hoping to be invisible. It wasn't. No one noticed me for the first 30 seconds because they were orbiting around Zach. Zach, 28, varsity jacket swagger, a grin that had been carved by compliments, stood in the center like an exhibit, blonde, loud, prepped for worship. Aunt Sandra plucked at my sleeve the moment I stepped onto the lawn with the self, possession of a woman who'd rehearsed surprise for all outcomes. Clara, oh my God, you're here. You have to come say hello to Zach. He just got hired at Nexra. She spoke so loudly the word Nexra became a drumbeat. I recognized the name. It was one of those finance firms flashing in business columns, the kind you read while pretending you don't enjoy the scent of success that clings to journalists. Her eyes widened in that way pride does when it expects you to cower. He's going to be a millionaire before he's 30, she told whoever would listen. She lets the last syllable hang like an accusation. Unlike some people, she added slow enough that someone farther down the block could pretend to be offended on her behalf. I had a drink in my hand. The lemonade tasted like memory and tuition payments. I could have responded with 3 kinds of honesty: the slow burn version, the brutal version, or the quiet one that tells a whole room the truth with a single line. I chose the last. I signed Zach's paycheck last week. I said the sentence unmanned but steady like a door shutting. Silence did that soft, contagious thing it does when oxygen is suddenly scarce. Zach blinked as if someone had translated his life into a language he hadn't studied. Aunt Sandra's grin twitched the way an animal's does when it hears a new predator on the lawn. Grandpa, 85, hard of hearing, full of mischief he couldn't always explain, lifted himself on his cane and squinted like a judge, locating the point of interest. "Oh, wait a damn minute," he announced loud enough for the nearby lawn chairs to settle. It was a ridiculous way to begin a family verdict. Grandpa's declarations rarely followed the manners the rest of the room kept. But then he had never pretended to be anything other than blunt. If I tell you this was planned, I'd be lying. It was the result of 7 years stitched together with nights of code, cold rice, and desperation. When I left college at 23, the family populated the exit with sighs and prophecies that I was lost, that I would end up delivering pizzas or playing guitar in some poorly lit bar. My father went quiet for weeks. My mother cried at night. Aunt Sandra performed a minor exorcism of shame at their dinner table. What they did not know then, and what I never wanted them to know until the moment I chose, was how much of myself I would trade in for a stubborn belief in an idea. I moved into a studio above a laundromat with a ceiling that leaked secrets and walls so thin I could hear other people's regrets. I delivered groceries at night, wrote mock-ups by day, and learned to argue with investors until the phrases I used sounded like prayers. There were months I didn't eat much beyond rice. There were worse months when a friendly algorithm crashed and a client left, and I considered the taste of giving up. And then the little miracles, a $1.99 subscription from a company in Ohio that made me cry in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, a $1.50, zero angel investor who smelled of plain coffee and belief, the growth that only looks tiny from the inside and title from the outside. We scaled, we hired. Then a year ago, we sold a clean exit that was everything and nothing wrapped in one ledger. The figure was not the point. The point was I had built something. Aunt Sandra's mouth opened into a cartoon of distress. Jealous, she said to me, because accusation is often a reflex before curiosity. You came here to make a scene. Her voice was clinical but small. The room hated the awkwardness more than they hated me. My sister Victoria, still in the church of order that residency built for her, gave that minute sermon about being happy for other people's success, as though the moral calculus could repair decades of condescension. It had not been about spectacle. I didn't want trophy glances. I wanted to exist outside their scripts. The amusement on their faces had cost me years. It seems small to fix it with a line, but words are scalar. Say the right one, and a house of cards begins to rattle. Mom texted me, I said, trading the intimate for something sharper. She asked me to come. I came because I hoped this year would feel different. The hope stuck in my throat like a coin. They laughed in parts that were meant to sting. Victoria's pity was a perfectly honed instrument. My parents shifted like animals at a pond as gossip skimmed the surface. I thought of walking away, of letting the social fabric snap again. But then Grandpa's chuckle re-entered the room. Well, would you look at that, he said, inspecting me as if noting a new wrinkle on a map he had once thought familiar. I always knew you'd do something with those hands of yours. That line warmed me in a way applause never had, not because I needed approval, but because the old man, who had once been the sole audience for my model trains and later my follies, had chosen to see me. There is an intimacy in being recognized by someone who remembers the whole of you. I let the moment cool without elaboration, let them stew. Aunt Sandra recovered first, the queen reclaiming posture. Surely it's a joke, she muttered to someone half listening. But the best part of that backyard revelation was not the headlines I floated like a paper plane. It was quieter, more precise, the feeling of equilibrium after years of being expected to stay beneath. I remembered every Thanksgiving where my name was a cautionary footnote, every graduation where my absence came with a family whisper. I remembered the nights when I patched code and patched jeans and thought about what would happen the day it all changed. I walked away from that reunion before the fireworks. I didn't storm. I didn't gloat. I parked by the high school bleachers I used to haunt when everything seemed like an exam. I called my old mentor and said, laughing into the phone, I think I want to do something petty. He didn't hesitate. Then be petty and tasteful. So I was. A week later, I booked the city's most polished private room, a table that smelled of velvet, and parking valets who pronounced names like promises. I invited them all under the guise of celebrating some vague occasion. They came because families always come to their own performances. I wore a black suit and a silence I'd practiced. When dessert had been cleared and compliments were being doled like appetizers, I handed out a single sheet of paper. No fanfare, no drums, the page was clinical. Our holding company's org chart, small logos, and neatly under an executive legend, the line that made the room tilt, Nextra, under our parent brand, and my name a notch beneath the CEO. For a dozen people, their mental architecture slid fork-stilled. Aunt Sandra's cheeks went the color of old paper. Grandpa's hand trembled as he set the paper down, then chuckled with that particular conspiratorial delight only the very old get when they see a plan come full circle. For me, there was no giddy victory. I felt tired to the marrow. The best revenge, if that is the word, had always been living unbothered. That night, as I paid the bill and walked out into the city air that smelled faintly of rain, my phone buzzed with a call from Dad. A small notification that would push the story forward. Grandpa wants to see you. There's something important. In Problems and Gifts, the story always has a second act. I didn't know it yet, but the rest of my life and theirs had just tilted on its axis. The next morning, the phone was an orchestra of small, curious sounds, texts that read like surprise confessions, cousin emojis that felt thin, a screenshot of Aunt Sandra's now blanked Facebook, where the usual triumphant captions had been replaced by pictures of hydrangeas. My inbox was a slow rolling avalanche of people who had a sudden appetite for my timeline. Victoria sent an email, formal, measured, the kind of thing someone writes when they want to be taken seriously. Clara, I'm proud of you. I didn't know. My mother's message was shorter and raw. I didn't know either. I'm sorry. Apologies are tidy things. They fit into small envelopes, and sometimes they bring relief, but they rarely erase the echo of the years that shaped them. I read each message, answered some, let others wait. I didn't want to be a spectacle. I wanted to be a person who stopped needing to prove she existed. Liam sat on the couch while I scrolled. He doesn't do dramatic reactions. He folds laundry the way other people peel a band, date off, careful, methodical, tidy. He'd been my quiet anchor through the months of investor calls and the nights where the radiator droomed like a nervous heartbeat. When I had told him I wanted to invite my family to a celebration, he'd raised an eyebrow and said, "Make it tasteful," which is to say, perform your dignity, not your vengeance. He understood the difference. "You okay?" he asked, folding a shirt like he was refolding a memory. "Yeah." I tried to make my voice small so it wouldn't wake the old impatience inside me. Just a lot of noise. He put the shirt down and walked around the coffee table as if to close a distance he could not cross with words. "You did what you wanted to do," he said. It sounded routine because he'd heard my plans through the nights, and it was true. There's a particular calm that follows a gamble when the gamble is over and not entirely ruinous. But quiet vindication doesn't explain the nights that made the success possible. People imagine exits as confetti and champagne. The truth is more mundane and stingy. There were months where the cleanest hot water I could afford was the kind that barely steamed a pot of instant noodles. There were clients who ghosted us on a Friday and calls that sounded like mercy pleas by Tuesday. David, my first collaborator, the one who ate cold pizza and rewired a backend at my dining table for cheap, believed as if belief were a currency when he left because his mother fell ill. The room where we built the company felt twice as big and twice as empty. I remember the night the Stripe message hit my phone from a tiny Ohio firm that had subscribed for $1.99 a month. I pulled over at a 24-hour gas station, sat behind the wheel with the engine ticking the heat into the air, and wept quietly, a sudden, slippery thing that had nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with being recognized by reality. The first $600 month we celebrated with 2 paper Burger King crowns and cheap cola. We felt ridiculous and triumphant at the same time. The next years felt like a long, slow climb up a slope that kept reconfiguring itself. A good angel investor arrived. Robert, a man with a graying beard and a pennon for plain suits. He didn't awe us. He steadied us. He wired $50 0 and told us to hire one decent developer and stop sleeping on the office couch. From there, we signed more clients, the kind that leave deposits and the kind that leave lessons, and the narrative of our nights changed. We expanded, pivoted, learned to talk the right language. It was all incremental until it wasn't. Then an acquisition came along. Clean terms, no drama, a figure big enough to change our addresses, and small enough to keep me awake worrying how to steward the trust that comes with money. It wasn't ostentation that moved me. I like small, steady things, a Sunday routine gone unbroken, the feel of a well-made coffee, the rare hour when my head doesn't bustle with schedules. What moved me was reclaiming the space in which I had been catalogued as lost. I wanted the family to be forced briefly into a new alignment where they would have to reconsider the shorthand they used to describe me. When I handed them that folded sheet at the restaurant, it did more than stop forks. It redrew lines they assumed were carved into stone. People who have never done the work of building something from scraps have a vocabulary of pity and certainty. "You're my nephew. You'll be fine," they say, as if compassion can be delegated to a punchline. I'd been fine while they listened to their own echo. I wanted them to know what fine looked like on its own terms. Aunt Sandra's silence was performative for a few days, as if she had misplaced her outrage and needed Little while to find it again, but silence isn't neutral. It's a shape that holds tension. People texted, called, and then retreated. The town's gossip circuits, obligatory and bored, found new material. How did Clara come into this? Did she manipulate anyone? Was Grandpa being taken advantage of? These questions brushed at me with the same dullness as old resentments. The truth is usually simple. Grandpa chose. People prefer narratives where the wronged are clever enough to arrange their own redemption. It's more comfortable than admitting they were blind. I thought of the moment Grandpa had leaned back in his chair and given me that old man grin, the one that carried approval more weighty than any LinkedIn endorsement. He said then with a softness that surprised me, "I always admired the way you kept at things. You earned it." A few days later, when he invited me over with the casualness of someone who wants to hand you a tool, I found a file he'd already begun to prepare. Deeds, a folded promissory note with a signature from a younger Sandra, old stock certificates with faded edges. He had been doing something quietly for months, perhaps longer, and his choice to pass it to me felt less like a gift and more like a correction. I wasn't blind to the power in those documents. Power is an object you can set on a table and watch others rearrange themselves around it. I felt something unfamiliar, a responsibility. It is one thing to walk into a room and announce your victory. It is another to hold the mechanism that can change how that room functions. Grandpa's decision did not fuel a feast of spite inside me. It focused my appetite for order. After the restaurant, life didn't become a parade. There were emails from lawyers who wanted small clarifications, a few awkward conversations with cousins, and an aunt who stopped posting videos of her garden with passive-aggressive captions about humility. There were also quieter shifts. Victoria wrote me a formal letter that slowly started to sound like an olive branch. She invited me to a hospital fundraiser where she would speak. People did not instantly transform. They adjusted in increments. What surprised me more was Zach. He showed up to work earlier. He asked better questions on Slack. He stopped leaning on a charm that had served him since college. Watching him evolve in small ways felt less like Schadenfreude and more like relief. If anything, I wanted him to learn what I had learned the hard way, that titles mean nothing without the work that backs them. And then the voicemail from my dad came in. One of those low, static messages that sounds stranger on replay. "Clara, your grandfather's been asking for you. He wants to see you tomorrow if you can." It was the kind of request that carries the smell of finality and the promise of a second act. There are moments in a life that feel like doors opening. Sometimes behind those doors are tragedies, sometimes reconciliations, and sometimes a quiet set of keys that fit into a lock no one else knew existed. I had no idea which door Grandpa wanted opened, only that I would go. There are parts of a story you script and parts you receive. This, I realized, was one of the parts you receive, and the choices you make with it define whether you are a person who hoards power or one who reallocates it. I slept badly that night, as all people who hold decisions in their pockets do, and when morning came, I felt an odd mixture of fatigue and clarity. The path forward was not revenge dressed up as righteousness. It was a map with coordinates I had to mark carefully, but the map was now officially in my hands. Grandpa lived in the kind of house that looked like it had survived 3 generations of weather and 2 generations of secrets. The blue gate, chipped, stubborn, and always slightly leaning, was the same one I used to swing on as a kid until Aunt Sandra yelled that I'd break something valuable. I never knew if she meant the gate or me. When I reached the front porch, the morning sun had softened into a pale, forgiving gold. Dad was already there, leaning against the railing like someone waiting for news. He didn't know how to deliver. His posture told me more than his expression. He hadn't slept. The lines around his eyes looked carved rather than formed, as if worry had taken a chisel to him overnight. "He's awake," Dad said quietly, "and he's clear today." "Good day," I nodded. "Okay." He hesitated as he opened the door for me, the way people hesitate before letting someone enter a room where the truth is sitting in a chair, waiting to be acknowledged. Grandpa was in his recliner, the old brown one, with the fabric rubbed thin on the armrest, He used to tap his fingers while thinking. He wasn't tapping today. His hands rested on a blanket like they'd been placed there by someone else, but when he saw me, his eyes brightened, still sharp, still him. "Clara girl," he said, voice warm but thinner, "come sit. We've got things to settle. Dad touched my shoulder briefly, then stepped outside to give us privacy. The door clicked shut with a softness that still felt final. I sat in the chair across from Grandpa, the one with the lopsided cushion. He studied me for a moment. "You handled yourself well at that restaurant. I heard about it from everyone who couldn't mind their business." I huffed a quiet laugh. "I didn't mean to make a scene." "No," he said, amused, "but you meant to make yourself seen. There's a difference, and it's about damn time." He shifted slightly, winced, then took a breath. "I didn't bring you here to talk about estates or money. Not today. I've been working on that for months. Longer maybe, but that's not the urgent part." A weight settled in my stomach. "What is?" He reached to the side table. A stack of envelopes waited there, tied together neatly with twine. The edges were curled from age. Some were yellowed, some were still crisp. "I wrote to you," he said, "for years." My breath caught. He placed the bundle in my hands. My name, Clara, written in his handwriting, appeared again and again. "I sent everyone," he continued, "or thought I had. A few came back, most didn't. You responded to three out of nearly 50, and I used to wonder if you got tired of me, or if you were too busy, or if maybe you'd outgrown the old man who wasn't always easy to love." I swallowed hard. "Grandpa, I never got them." He nodded slowly as if he'd expected that answer but needed to hear it anyway. "I know," he said softly. "I didn't at first, but I know now." He reached again, this time for a small worn notebook. Inside were dates, notes, confirmations, tracking numbers, his attempts to trace his own words. "I found something by accident," he said. "A receipt in Sandra's drawer for a service mail forwarding. She redirected anything addressed to you for years." My stomach twisted. "She said it was for the family's sake," he continued calmly, though his jaw tightened. "Said she didn't want you to be influenced by unrealistic encouragement, that you needed to focus on stability, not false hope." The room tilted. My pulse thudded in my ears. She intercepted everything. I asked, voice faint. He gave me a tired smile. "The woman has many talents. Empathy is not one of them." I sat there, clutching the stack of letters, feeling something inside me break. Not the kind of break that leaves you shattered, but kind that reveals a truth you can't unsee. "All those years," I whispered, "I thought you forgot me." Grandpa's eyes softened in a way that felt like someone lifting a heavy coat off my shoulders. "I could never," he said, "not once." The silence between us thickened, not uneasy, but full. "There's more." He added after a moment, "Something I want to make right before time runs out." I leaned forward. He gestured toward the hallway. "In my study, top drawer of the desk. A key. Bring it." My heartbeat quickened as I stood and walked down the familiar hall. Pictures lined the walls. Cousins, weddings, holidays. In almost none of them was I present. Looking at them felt like staring at a history I had been edited out of. The study smelled of old paper and cedar. In the drawer was a single key taped to an index card with Grandpa's handwriting. "For Clara, only Clara." I brought it back. He nodded toward the old metal lock box near his feet. My fingers shook as I opened it. Inside was a folder labeled "Property Trance" for original intention, and inside that, my breath left me. The deed, not the one he'd given me after the dinner, an older one signed years ago, leaving the entire estate, land, house, assets to me, not to Sandra, not split. Me years ago, before the arguments, before the distancing, before the silence she engineered. "This was supposed to be yours a long time ago," Grandpa said quietly, but she meddled. She lied. She hid documents. She had me signing things I didn't fully understand because she said it was simpler. I was careless. I trusted her, and you paid the price." I stared at him, throat tight. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't either," he said. "Not until I started checking. Not until the lawyers showed me what was missing. And not until you walked into that restaurant stronger than I've ever seen you." He reached out, took my hand. "I want you to have what was always meant for you. Not because of success, not because of revenge, because you were the one who never asked for anything and built your life anyway." Emotion rose sharp and warm. "Grandpa," he squeezed my hand, weak but steady. "I'm asking one thing of you," he said. "Take what's yours and don't let anyone rewrite what really happened." I nodded, tears slipping free. "I won't." He smiled, the soft, proud one I remembered from childhood. "Good girl." Outside, Dad cleared his throat, pretending he hadn't been standing by the door, listening. The letters lay on my lap like returned years, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle inside my chest. Not vindication, belonging. After Grandpa's revelation, the house felt different, lighter, though heavy, with years of secret finally exposed. I sat in the living room, letters scattered around me like fallen leaves, every envelope, every word, a small testament to the truth that had been kept from me. Dad cleared his throat again, this time stepping fully into the room. "Clara, you know Sandra won't take this quietly." His voice was calm, but the warning was clear. I nodded. "I know. I just want you prepared. She's clever. She twists stories. She plays the victim like it's an art form. You'll need more than truth. I have the proof." I interrupted, holding up the letters and the old deed. "She can't argue with this." Dad nodded, relieved but still uneasy. "It's not just legal. It's family. People get messy when their lies crumble." I clenched my jaw. For years I had been waiting, unsure if vindication would ever feel real. Now it sat before me like a fragile glass vase, and I wasn't about to let it shatter again. Grandpa coughed softly, drawing my attention. "You need to confront her," he said. "Face it head on. Don't let her control the narrative any longer." "You've been silent too long." The words hit me harder than I expected. Silence that had been my default for years. Fear of making waves, fear of confrontation, fear of her. But sitting there, seeing the years reclaimed for me, I realized silence had protected her, not me. "I'll do it," I said firmly, my voice steady for the first time, feeling like I had ownership over it. Grandpa smiled weakly. "Good, that's the Clara I know." Dad gave me a small, encouraging nod. "I'll be with you if you want, but you need to say it your truth." I took a deep breath, glancing once more at the letters. Each one told a story Sandra tried to erase. Each one whispered the life I could have had, the love I deserved, the recognition I'd been denied. The confrontation would be messy, it would hurt, but it was time to reclaim my history, my inheritance, and most importantly, my voice. I stood gathering the letters, the old deed, the notebook Grandpa had shown me. For the first time in years, I felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. I wasn't just walking into a conversation. I was stepping into a reckoning. Grandpa rose slowly, leaning on his cane. "Whatever happens," he said, "remember this, truth is yours. They can't take that from you." And he was right. I left the house with the blue gate behind me, the letters tucked securely in my bag, and a sense of resolve I hadn't known I could carry. The sun was higher now, illuminating the path ahead. As I drove away, I thought about the years of silence. The absence of acknowledgement, the lies that had shaped my life. But now, armed with undeniable truth, I knew the next steps would define me. Not Sandra, not the past, but me. I glanced at Dad, who drove beside me. He gave me a small, reassuring smile, a silent promise of support. "We face her today?" I asked. "Yes," he said firmly, "but remember, don't let anger guide you. Let the truth do the work." The thought echoed in my mind, let the truth do the work. I knew deep down that once I crossed this threshold, nothing could remain the same. Not our family dynamics, not the lies, not even the blue gate that had always seemed so permanent, so unyielding. Because sometimes it only takes one person, one voice to shatter the silence and demand what is rightfully theirs, and that person was me. I arrived at Sandra's house just as the late afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across her manicured lawn. Everything about the place screamed perfection. The freshly painted shutters, the smell of flowers blooming in symmetrical beds, the white picket fence she always made a point of showing off, but I wasn't here to admire it. Dad followed behind, carrying the folder with all the letters and deeds. "You ready?" he asked softly. I nodded, my stomach twisting into a knot that felt equal parts anxiety and resolve. "As ready as I'll ever be." We stepped up to the front door. Sandra answered before we even had a chance to knock. Her smile was wide, practiced like she had been expecting someone. "Clara," she said, voice sugary, masking something sharper beneath. And Mr. Foster, what a surprise. I held my folder tight. We need to talk, I said plainly. No small talk, no polite pretense, just the words that had been brewing for years. Sandra's smile faltered ever so slightly, of course. Come in. Come in, she said, stepping aside. The living room was immaculate, as if every surface had been polished to hide dust and secrets. I sat down, Dad beside me and Sandra across the coffee table, eyes bright but calculating. I opened the folder and began to lay out the evidence. These letters, I said, voice firm, prove that for years you manipulated the story about the family estate. You misrepresented my grandfather's intentions, and you've been denying me what's rightfully mine. Sandra's expression shifted into mild disbelief, a slow blink that said she was buying time, waiting for me to falter. Clara, I don't know what you mean. Those letters are just old notes. Memories can be interpreted in different ways. I didn't flinch. I pushed one of the letters across the table. This one is from Grandpa himself, dated 10 years ago. He clearly states that the property should be split equally among his grandchildren. Your interpretation isn't valid. Her jaw tightened. Well, we've all interpreted things differently over the years, haven't we? Not this time, I said, leaning forward. I have the proof. I have the deeds. You cannot argue with the truth. You've spent years trying to erase it, but it's here and it's mine. Sandra's face fell slightly, but the veneer of composure remained. Clara, you've always been dramatic. Why does it matter so much to you now? It matters because I was silenced for years. I was told my voice didn't count. My grandfather's wishes didn't count. I've lived in your shadow for far too long, and I'm done being quiet. For the first time, I saw real fear flash in her eyes, a fear she couldn't hide behind smiles or manipulation. The balance of power had shifted, and she knew it. Dad leaned forward, voice steady. We're not here to argue sentiment. We're here to settle what's legally and morally yours. The evidence is clear. Sandra looked between us, her posture rigid, the facade cracking. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Silence filled the room like a heavy curtain, suffocating but inevitable. Finally, she whispered almost to herself, I didn't think you'd ever find this. I didn't think you'd fight back. I exhaled slowly, letting years of frustration, anger, and hurt slide out. I'm not just fighting for documents, Sandra. I'm fighting for my life.